Good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to Construct Innovate webinar series. My name is Magda Hajdukewicz. I'm a co-director of Construct Innovate, Ireland's National Research Centre for Construction Technology and Innovation. And today we are kicking off the next topic of the webinars in digital construction technologies. And today's topic is digital construction landscape. It's one of 6 topics that will last until the early December, and you will be able to sign up for those webinars in the coming days. I want to welcome very warmly our 3 fantastic speakers that will be presenting. Kerry-Anne Pollock, Chief Digital Information Officer at Wolf & Oak, who will be showing us how digital transformation can unlock housing delivery at scale. The second speaker is Stephen Lynam from the Office of Government Procurement, speaking about public sector procurement BIM adoption. And the final speaker, Dr. Ciara Ahern from the Irish Building Stock Observatory at TU Dublin, showing us data-driven approach for enhanced building stock modeling. And if you have any questions for our speakers, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And after the 3 presentations, we'll come back to your questions in the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Kerry-Anne to share her slides and start the webinar.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about from projects to platforms and how digital transformation can unlock housing delivery. So my name is Kerry Pollock. I'm the co-founder and Chief Digital Information Officer for Wolf & Oak and General Dodds Body. We provide business and digital advisory services across many sectors. My own experience, I'm working 25 plus years at this stage, unfortunately, and primarily in the banking sector, working for the Big Four, and in the past 10 years in the construction sector. So when James pinged me last week, he asked me, was I interested in doing this? And I said, yes, of course. And I asked him who the audience was. So he said to me, it's primarily engineers. So as a technologist at heart, I did what any good technologist would do. I asked AI what I should talk about. So ChatGPT said to me, Kerry, keep it practical, show me what actually works on site, and for the love of God, no strategy buzzwords. So I can't commit to not talking about the buzzwords, but I'll do my best. So just at a macro level, not teaching anybody how to suck eggs, but we're still dealing with the same issues. So soaring house prices, severe housing shortage, increase in homelessness, population pressure, and policy changes. I'm not going to fix any of those issues today, but I prefer to look more, I suppose, at the reality on the ground. And with what we do at Wolf & Oak, we tend to get contacted by the senior team or executives within construction or home building organizations. And there's always a sense of frustration, but the problems and themes are normally around the same things. So for example, we'd have people, telling us that there's issues with tenders. We do them all the time, but 80% of that work should actually be repeatable. But why is it like we're starting from scratch every time? And similar then with site setups, we've lots of sites all over the country. But again, it's every site setup is like it's the first time we're doing it. And we've lots of systems, we've even more Excel, and we've probably using WhatsApp a lot more than we should as well post-COVID. We've, our teams, our QA photos can be anywhere from phones to email to saved on local desktops. I always think 3 is the magic number. Everybody seems to be keying in information either into Excels, into emails, or uploading into CDE. And naming conventions, most of the organizations we deal with are ISO 19650 certified. However, the naming conventions are Rev A, Rev A1, Rev A1 final. And then site diaries are frequently lost during projects because actually as it transpires, somebody's been storing information on their local laptop, on their hard drive. Permits, RFIs and QA checklists scattered across multiple systems. And I always find it hilarious when people start to pull information out of one system only to upload it into another to look like we're actually operating a different way than we are. And dashboards, again, I've gone into some companies and I've thought you must need a master's to actually decipher what I'm looking at. But The reality is they're so complicated, they're no longer useful. They're actually detailed reports. And again, it takes a lot of time and training and effort to actually really get the value from those. And then what's really surprising to me when I first moved into the sector was Excel. It's really the system of record within this business, to the point I've worked in businesses where I reckon if the place went on fire, somebody would be screaming, running through, asking where Excel was. There's such a dependency on it. And there's an awful lot of time spent on tracking down information rather than being able to actually utilize it. And that's normally what we get from the senior team. But for me, we start to engage then with the business and the people on the ground. So again, while you're in these organizations, people might, particularly say QSs, for example, they might be giving out all the time how hard their job is and, there's not enough hours in a day. But the minute you come near them with the intention of some kind of change, everybody starts to protect what they do because it works. So we get told a lot that, we're digital, every project we use has a CDE, but it's mostly a file dump. And again, information's been stored that they're really using in WhatsApp and emails. We're using standardized templates. And again, there could be 5 or 6 active sites, but everybody has their own version and they're saving it somewhere else. Our data is not too bad. It's rarely complete. It's duplicated. It's caught in spreadsheets and nobody fully trusts it. That's the reality. It's nearly always a call to, we'll ring John. John will know. We've great reporting dashboards. Again, the reality is a lot of these are updated. Somebody's sitting on an Excel on a Friday afternoon, populating a spreadsheet so it looks like a dashboard is up to date. And BIM, again, in its own right, it's fantastic, but the reality is it really falls apart after design. That collaboration piece never seems to really be fully embedded. So therefore, the digital thread actually stops at the gate once we move into construction. And everyone knows the process, but it's nearly always in people's heads. I'd often challenge people, the paper and pen test. Because again, a lot of this knowledge is leaving when people are leaving. It's tacit knowledge that's leaving when people leave the organization. We've strong governance, and there's nothing like seeing strong governance at the end when people are, it's a scrum when people are trying to get the paperwork ready for a handover. Even though we've had a lot of this throughout the life cycle of the project, it's always a hustle. We've got plenty of tools, but none of them actually talk to each other. And we're too busy building to focus on digital. And from my perspective, we need to slow down if we really want to speed up. So it's the lack of digital structure that's making it actually harder to build efficiently. If you're lucky enough to work in an organization where they have invested in technology, the reality, we find a lot that the systems they had 10 years ago are still the systems that they have today. And while they're great to get you to where you are, you really have to take stock to go, are these the ones to take us to where we need to get to next? There's no real ownership or strategic direction with respect to technology because it hasn't really been seen as an important factor in the life cycle of construction. IT operations, it's really about just keeping the lights on. Cybersecurity is not taken seriously. The reality is it's not an IT issue, it's a business issue. And it's not a matter of if, it's when. Inadequate data management, we don't have business owners. So therefore, the response, nobody can really point the finger at anybody because nobody really knows who owns it. And then for those who haven't adopted or invested in systems like CRMs or ERPs or, Procore or Hammertech, we find that only about 20% of that technology is actually being utilized because really people don't understand how to get the most from it because we've just bought something and we expect to get results. And therefore it can be expensive as well. Well, for some of the CFOs I've worked with in construction, any spend in technology is too much because it's just not budgeted for. Vendors, therefore, tend to take advantage of this because they're not really dealing with people that have their finger on the pulse with respect to what they should be getting from the right partners. And there rarely is IT talent sitting in these companies because the reality is they're not technology companies as it currently stands. And then poor collaboration between teams, the on-site team, the back office team, the us and them mentality starts to really embed within an organization. And without the proper risk management and business continuity, how do you work? So for example, if there's a denial of service attack on site and nobody can log in, what's the actual business impact to that? So it's starting to really understand how we work and what the risk is associated with that. And again, poor budget management and cost control. So when we step back and we think about what does good look like, and it depends who you talk to, everybody's talking about AI and all this good stuff. But for me, it's really about brass tacks. The same way as you build a house, you have to look at the foundations first. So we typically carry out a deep dive. And again, for me in construction, the sweet spot is typically around 6 weeks. And that really gives my team enough insight to understand where the pain points are, you know, where the bodies are buried. But the reality is they're nearly always the same when we come across different companies. There's very little in the difference. And that doesn't matter if you're in construction or retail, to be honest. But we don't start with technology or software. We start with what the business problem is we're actually trying to fix. So we have to look at the business strategy to understand what they're trying to achieve. We need to look at the operating model to where we currently are today, and then map out what good looks like. And we create a plan to get there. We identify bottlenecks, look at, you know, duplication, removing waste from the life cycle, where we impact our quality, safety, or our margin. And then we quantify the impact, typically in financial terms. So how many meetings are happening every week because we can't get information? You know, we're looking at an outdated report with static information on a Friday. How many meetings happen on Monday with how many people at it? And what's the impact of that on site as a result? And then there's reputational impact as a result of not delivering on time, not having the right paperwork, and all those good things as well to consider. So we build a focused roadmap, and in this sector, typically it won't do any longer than 18 months. So 0 to 6 really is about quick wins and the low-hanging fruit. 6 to 12 is about the kind of foundations, and then 12 plus is really we're starting to look at automation, integration, and innovation. We go after quick wins early because momentum builds belief, and belief drives change. And then we keep it achievable. Like there's no point in trying to boil the ocean. We solve the right problems at the right time. And then measuring success every time. Remember, what gets measured actually gets managed. So once we engage after that, again, we'd focus on strong foundations. We understand what you have, we've mapped out what you need. And then the question I would always put to the senior team is, would you build a house without a project manager, or a contracts manager, or a QS to track cost and value, or engineers to make it stand up? So the answer is no. So why would you try to build a technology ecosystem that doesn't have the right skill set to drive it forward? Because digital transformation, it's not about software, and it's more about designing, coordinating, delivering long-term business outcomes. So technology isn't a driver, it's an enabler for delivering on the business objectives. So really having the right partner is in my opinion, is a fundamental to success, because you need, in this, it's niche in the sense that it's important to have a partner that actually understands what goes on site, and then the back end operations of actually how we run our business. So understanding the sector is important. Again, knowing how to translate actually what's important on construction and what technology can support that going forward. And then bringing the right people and the right frameworks to get it done right. I know I said no buzzwords, but I can't let this go. And I know Ciara's going to talk about this as well, but you know, cash is king in this business, that's the reality, and data is the new currency. And from companies I've worked with over the last 5 to 6 years, they all have the same thing. They're barely tapping on 5% of what they should be. And while construction won't ever become technology companies, they should be data companies. Data scattered everywhere at the moment. I have a visual there. I always relate back to Lego. You know, it's like just emptying a box of Lego. It's scattered. And what good looks like, again, Rome wasn't built in a day, but even if we can structure our data in a meaningful way so we can start to help us to make decisions. And look, in a land far, far away, we'd like to get to a place where we're actually using it to drive everything that we do. But small steps is definitely the key in relation to this. But I just wanted, I suppose, just a couple of examples of what data is used for and how it's important to different people within the construction sector at different times. So if we look at, you know, a portfolio visibility. So if I'm investing 100 million into a development and I have 500 units locked, I can see at any given time in my dashboard, okay, I have 100 in design, you know, X amount in pre-con, 200 in construction, 100 ready to snag, 100 handover. So from a, you know, construction director perspective, he's looking to see, right, well, I'm looking at my plan, I'm looking at what this is telling me, are we on track or not? So I can start to look to go where I'm starting to see trends. If you have standard milestones in the background for all of your builds, you can start to see, you can start to track progress. If I'm an executive and I've allocated 100 million for this development over 2 years, I can see how much money is in the bank that we haven't touched, how much is in the ground, and how close I am to starting getting money into the bank. So I'm looking at my WIP balance. Quality assurance, again, is another one that I think is always interesting. So if we look at defects, we can track defects, but a defect is not a good thing. That's the reality. So what good looks like is we're trying to reduce our number of defects. But if you have a dashboard that's starting to show you the number of defects across several sites, you can start to see trends, whether it's certain subcontractors you're getting a large amount of defects from. Well, that's a conversation with somebody to get to the root cause to understand, well, why have we got more from them and we've less from the others? But likewise, where are we getting low defects? Can we do more business with those subcontractors because they're doing a better job? So there's an opportunity constantly to move to not just reactive, but more to proactive way to build and lessons learned, and constantly challenge yourself to improve throughout the life cycle. So just back, I suppose, to the title, it was a big title, but looking at the business value and how digital changes, and you probably noticed I haven't really talked about technology so far, because to be honest, I would have failed, because it's never really about technology. That's the easy part. It's people and process. Technology enables. If we start to look at some of the things where technology, people and process, we can start to support change. We look at faster program delivery, but what does that actually mean? So we're saving time, productivity gains, we're in less meetings. We're starting to translate to shorter project timelines, because actually we now have more time to focus on what really matters. We can make our decisions become easier to make in one meeting instead of 5 meetings, because actually we're used to turning up, looking at static information. 5 people have to go out and qualify what was presented was right or wrong. Another meeting to go through it again. But what good looks like is we're in a room, we're looking at a dashboard, we can see the data in front of us, and we can depend on it. We can start to make real-time decisions to identify opportunities or to reduce risk. Improve quality and reduce cost of error. Right information plus right time equals fewer defects, fewer disputes, and less rework. Stronger client confidence and reputation, because now we're following through on what we said, and we're not, apologizing for being late or missing handovers and things like that. Accelerate project closeout and cash flow. So digital O&M packs, it's much easier to put together. Automated documentation, speed up client side, earlier revenue recognition as a result, and stronger cost position for reinvestment. Predictable performance at scale, because now we've standard milestones. We're tracking progress across the life cycle. So we've real visibility of our projects from different perspectives at different times. And most importantly, we've one source of the truth. We're starting to support consistent reporting. Reduce risk and stronger compliance. Again, it's not a case of everybody's running together at the 11th hour to try to find all the paperwork that's required for whatever audit we're going for. We should be embedding this into how we work, and it makes life easier at the end. Lower exposure to contractual and regulatory risk as a direct result. And then from team and people perspective, engineers are spending more time on delivery and less time acting like data clerks. Clear ownership, better morale, and higher retention rates, because people feel more valued in how they're working, because they're working more productive. They're the right tools to support and do the right job, and the data is telling the story. And sustainable growth and profitability. So scalable process to deliver more projects with the same resources, higher margins, and long-term competitive advantage. Everybody wants that. So just, if you are, I suppose, thinking about heading out on this journey, what I would say is there's definitely rules to follow. And again, I've walked away from customers myself where I feel that they're just not in the space. I'm not going to waste my time, and I'm not going to waste their money. But, if you don't have executive sponsorship for this, don't waste your time and don't waste your company's money. Because if you're going to do this right, the reality is there's going to be change. You're changing how people work. You're changing how people interact with each other. You're changing, the system is the easy part that I mentioned already. So there can be a lot of noise, and the reality is we all know what happens on site takes priority. So if somebody's picking up the phone and going, ringing the CEO going, I can't do this or whatever, they don't care that you're bringing in a new platform. They just want the job done. So that's really bringing them on the journey and getting them to understand the what and the why is really important. And then understanding the business challenges, like technology should be solving problems. It shouldn't be adding new ones. It's an enabler. So again, to think about that throughout the life cycle. And clear ownership and accountability. It needs an owner. It needs a business owner as well as a technology owner. Not another committee meeting where everybody has an opinion, but nobody's really on the hook. And don't be afraid to go live with an MVP, because, in my experience, you can spend six more months on something to get 10% further. Sometimes it's okay, because actually it's only when it's brought into practice people really identify the opportunities of how this can work. So start small and show the value. Don't forget to take the feedback from the people on the ground. I can't underestimate that. Or it doesn't work on site, it's not going to work, full stop. You have to bring people along. So the executive think that there's one issue, but the reality on the ground is often different. So it's really important to have that balance and demonstrate the value. You build trust and measurable wins with that. And it's also important to celebrate success and to talk about it, because this is a way of working. It's not a point in time delivery. It's about bringing people along and creating a community of practice for change, and people can bring ideas forward. So that's just the nuts of mine anyway. So I hope it didn't bore anybody too much, but that's it for me.
Thanks very much, Kerry-Anne. This is a fantastic introduction to this session on the digital construction landscape. And, you know, like you showed clearly that there's loads of data available in the construction sector. All companies generate and manage and handle loads of data. But, you know, the reality on the ground can be a challenge, and it's all about how we can get the value out of that information and data available. Fantastic. Thank you very much. We're going to ask Stephen now to share his slides, and Stephen will talk about the BIM adoption in public procurement. So it's over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, just 1 second there now. Presume you can see that there now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, hi everybody. Welcome to this Digital Construction Technologies webinar. My name is Stephen Lynam. I have recently moved, or our department has recently moved from the OGP into the Department of Public Expenditure Reform, and we're now closer, I suppose, to where core decisions are made from a government point of view. And this presentation is to give you a kind of an overview of where public sector BIM adoption is in the industry at the moment. There's quite a few slides in it, so I'll go through them pretty quickly, and I'm sure a copy of them will be made available after the seminar. So just as an introduction, public works procurement is managed by the capital framework, capital works management framework, and it's compulsory where the state contributes 50% or greater funding for the project at hand. The BIM implementation strategy was brought around as a review of the public works contract in 2014, which found that the required level of information that was in tender documents in a lot of cases was not fit for purpose. So there was a position paper published in 2017 by the Office of Public Procurement, and it gave the government's broad intention to use BIM as part of public works projects in Ireland. On the 4th of November 21, the Minister for Public Expenditure Reform, they sanctioned the use of BIM and introduced the BIM mandate by the adoption of Build Digital Alliance led by TU Dublin, which is now known as the Build Digital Project. And government used the Build Digital Project as a platform to give guidance and templates and provide supports for the industry involved in public works procurement. Standards have been imposed on the Capital Works Management Framework through the RGP by ministerial sanction, and that was on the 4th of July 2023 for BIM adoption. BIM requirements have been introduced by mandate to the Capital Works Management Framework from the 1st of January 2024, and it commenced with large-scale projects, and the intention is over a 48-month period or a 4-year period. It'll eventually be introduced to all public works projects. And the cost of BIM is embedded in the project budget. So people concerned about how they're going to pay for BIM, it's part of the capital allocation funding for the multi-annual delegated capital sanction 24 to 27. So that just means BIM would be treated very similarly to the costs associated with any project. Each client has to make an application for BIM costs within the project budget. So where are we now? We're almost coming up on 22 months into the BIM mandate. We have, as of July this year, the design teams for projects greater than 10 million now have a BIM mandate requirement. And from the 1st of January, then that will fall onto the contractors and supply chain. It's important to note that it can't fall onto the contractor and supply chain if the design team haven't been engaged in BIM in the first instance. So it has to be a synchronized approach. Design team first, contractor second. As I said, this is where we are now. It's phase rollout over 48 months, which will end in January 2028. And at that point, BIM will be required on all public works contracts. Volume of projects that are affected in 2024. So as you can see, as we get towards closer to 2028, it's going to affect all projects in the public sector. So the key point here will be, you need to start your BIM digital adoption transition now if you haven't already done so. And again, this is the mind map of what is Capital Works Management Framework, Public Infrastructure Guidelines, CWMF Procurement, integration with e-tenders, project data, you have statute planning data, consultancy and pre-contract payments, financial construction payments, and BIM is seen as something that can manage that entire process. Currently, there's 5 stages in the CWMF, 11 contracts, 20 model forms, arbitration rules, AITTs, 4 forms of tender, 4 conditions of engagement, 4 information to tenders, 6 consultancy models, consultancy arbitration rules, 6 SAQs with 19 appendices and 10 supplementary documents, 27 guidance documents, about 2,500 pages of guidance in total, 1 glossary. And from that, you can gather it's a very complex process, but we need to try and systemize it. So there's 2 ways of doing that. Well, there's 1 way of doing it. It's 2 aspects. First aspect is imposing mandatory standards for information sharing across all stages of a project lifestyle. Training, absolute must for staff. That has to be client driven. And again, each client then needs to develop an organizational information requirements which supports the digital transition. And it's not just BIM, it's an entire digital transition. The second aspect is obviously because we're a government organization, is to support government bodies in the adoption of BIM. We've 3 master classes done. The digital project has 3 webinars on information management completed. They're available online on the Build Digital platform. We have a public sector BIM group, which is active at the moment, imposing the standards. So these are probably the 4 key drivers. ISO 19650 series it has been adopted into the CWMF. This is on a phased basis up until January 2028, when it's compulsory for all public works projects. It also includes a classification system called Uniclass. 2015 was what it was originally called, but I think people refer to it now as Uniclass. And how do we share model data? We need to use IFC files, which is mandated again. These are industry foundation class files, normally used for sharing models and large volumetric data. And on top of that, then we have the ICMS, and this has got to do with your cost management, so that cost centers are aligned with industry best practice. It also means setting minimum project information requirements for all stages of the CWMF. They're already predefined in the CWMF, so they should be your starting point. And the appointing party or the contracting authority, they need to be able to specify the level of BIM required for each stage of their project. Needs to align with their BIM requirements. Again, these are just kind of explanations of the 4 basic requirements of the mandate. When we send on the presentations, you'll have a copy of those to look at. Aspect 2, supporting the public bodies. As it says, master classes have been done. We're looking at amendments to the protocol and the contract. We also have a collaboration between ourselves, Build Digital, and the National Standards Authority of Ireland. From that alliance, we've produced a pre-contract BIM execution plan and a post-contract BIM execution plan. There's also specific guidance and templates. There are EIRs, OIRs, asset information models, project information requirements, training, Build Digital, and others. So on the Build Digital platform, you will find a training section in it. And in that training section, it lists basically, I think there's about 300 different courses that can be taken on by management within your organization, by technical people within your organization. Well worth having a look at and select the course that you really want to do. And also then in conjunction with the NSAI, we're looking at ISO 19650 certification for businesses and construction companies. This is just kind of an org chart of how we manage and share information at a high level. It would be great if we can get people from the private sector to get in contact with Build Digital that's the side of things we're lacking a little bit on at the moment. We have great buy-in from the public sector side of things, and things are advancing well there. And again, when I share these slides, you'll be able to see where you need to go. And on the NSAI side of things, for those of you that are getting involved in BIM implementation, there's 2 standard packs available at reduced cost from the NSAI. Pack A is for your initial implementation, and Pack B is once your organization is set up to go and implement BIM. It's the nuts and bolts and the details about how information is shared. Again, these are available on the NSAI platform under the shop, the BIM standards pack, 30% reduction on Pack A and about 23% reduction on Pack B. 7 steps to public works or to BIM implementation for public works clients. These are kind of a high level overview of what they are. So number 1, you need to be looking at an information manager. 2, you need to develop a plan to adopt ISO 19650. You need to choose the appropriate software and hardware. And again, then you need to set your goals. You need to choose your team. You need to train your team, and then you need to monitor, evaluate, and adjust. And you know, I mean, these are critical steps. Now, I've gone into more detail in the steps, but time is against us here, so I'll quickly go through these slides. Hopefully, we'll be able to make them available to you so you can understand exactly what I was talking about for each of those steps. And the last thing I want to mention here then is we have an eWorks platform that's under development. It's for the suitability assessment questionnaire, hopefully be launched in the next soft launch within the next 2 weeks to invited users. It's 25 documents integrated and sequenced, fully digital online portal, client passport, tender bidder passport, learn from previous projects, enter only once principle, submission validation, can be used for all public works projects, and will help us inform the digital plan to digitalise the entire CWMF platform. So you'll have one resource to do your procurement, and your procurement includes from project concept to project reuse or end of life. Really well worthwhile getting involved in that project. And the last thing is, I just ask everyone to do, if you have a look at the Build Digital annual survey, is available at the moment on the Build Digital site. This helps inform us how well our industry is doing in digital adoption. So I would encourage anybody, if they can, to go and log into that platform and complete the survey. That's it from me in a nutshell. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Stephen. No, it's great. It's, you know, very important overview of the requirements for BIM requirements for public works. A lot of changes with the capital works management framework. I suppose sometimes it can be daunting seeing all the changes and what's happening. So, you know, any information, and especially presented in such a nice way, is very important. Also great to see, you know, the work done by Build Digital with providing templates, guidelines, training. Again, really important to our sector. Yes, perfect. And we can see your slides as well.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so Stephen will come back over me, but the title I was asked to speak on is a data-driven approach to enhancing building stock modelling. I'm a building services engineer by trade and a lecturer in TU Dublin, and a founder of the Irish Building Stock Observatory. So I just need to move my slides on. Yeah. So the policy, I just thought I'd start with the policy landscape that's coming down the tracks at all of us under the European Energy Performance of Building Directive, and specifically Article 22 and Article 16, which are summarised in the image on the right-hand side. But it's mandating that all countries have in place by May 2026, a single or interconnected national database, and that this database and the contents of that database will be reported to the EU Building Stock Observatory by March 2027. Now, the information in that database has to be machine readable, organised by building typologies. So I'll speak to that a little bit in, the difference between residential and non-residential, and that if we have data lakes, that each of those repositories have some sort of unique identifier that allow us to merge or federate databases. The whole idea is to monitor the energy performance of the stock and to inform renovation strategies, ultimately turning data into information, into policy. Now, the type of data that's they're going to mandate, well, in the very first instance, it'll be the EPC databases, or BRs as we call them in Ireland. And then maybe more nice to have would be the HVAC inspection reports, which have always appeared in Energy Performance of Building Directive legislation, but never really happen in reality. Building renovation passports and smart readiness indicators. And if you have EV attached to your building, they should be included as well. And so the stakeholders that this data is supposed to be made available to are building owners, tenants and managers. They're just down on the bottom left of that image, would have direct access to the database. And that also would apply to prospective tenants, buyers and independent experts. Local authorities should be able to isolate data, the database for their territory, and examine the state of their stock. The data must be made publicly available twice a year, and the baseline data, or the underlying data, as they classed it in a webinar, EU webinar for the data nerd, should be downloadable from your national databases. The other thing they want is that we can link GIS systems, so spatial information or spatial analysis, into BER systems. And the cadastral logbooks there are links with land registry and valuation offices, etc. So why are we doing all this? From the state of the stock or an energy consumption of the building stock at large, 36% of our global energy consumption on buildings is on energy from buildings, and that produces 37% of emissions. And if we look at that emission breakdown, 17% is on residential, 10% on commercial, public and industrial, and 10% is from the evolution of buildings, so their construction, demolition and renovation. And if I was at a talk this morning, and we don't really have fixed data. A lot of the renovation rates are estimated at 1%, 45% is our target, and then somebody else used a statistic of 8.9% this morning for commercial renovation. So the point is, depending on what data repository you're looking at, you might get a different statistic. So what we do in the Irish Building Stock Observatory is we're modelling the stock at a national level. And we're then putting energy characteristics with that stock to get an energy footprint. And we can influence what we can measure. So we have 1.8 million, and that's in the next slide, 1.8 million domestic properties and 211 commercial or non-residential, 211,000 non-residential properties. So we can't possibly model every single building. It'll be too computationally intensive. So what we do is we tend to segment by non-residential, residential, and then we'd further segment certainly residential by dwelling typology, whether that's semi-detached, detached, apartment, etc. And in commercial it'll be office, retail. And then we seek to characterize the buildings, and these reference buildings characterize buildings that are representative of a large proportion of the stock. And what we do is we micromodel those and aggregate the savings up to stock level. And so we use the Cognati framework typically on the right there for operation, system, form and envelope. And that gives us all the energy characteristics of the building. And all that data for the energy characteristics is embodied in our national BER EPC data sets. And then we use the CSO data set for the residential to aggregate up to quantify in that image and then validate with top-down energy statistics. And for the commercial sector, we tend to use the Touch Ahern geodirectory, which is on Post's spatial directory. So it's looking a little bit at what we have in terms of data on our building stock. So we have 1.8 million occupied dwellings in Ireland at the time of the last census, and we have 1.4 million BR ratings for those. So there's 78% of the stock is represented. For the non-residential, if you move agriculture buildings, we have about 156 non-residential properties, and we have 97,000 entries in the non-residential EPC database. So we have 62% of the stock represented. And when you turn them into statistics, they're very statistically significant to a 1% error, 99% confidence interval. So it's not, we have the quantum of data that we need to turn data into information. But what is the quality of the data in those data sets? I suppose that's what the IBSO does. It gets into the weeds of the data quality. But first, why does data quality matter? Well, the BRs and EPCs, or EPCs in Europe, BRs in Ireland, are being used for much more than they were originally intended for, which was an asset rating as a comparative tool. They're used to inform renovation strategies, national policies. People applying for a mortgage are being risk assessed on their ability to renovate, the cost of renovating if they're buying a D, E or F property, to renovate that to a B2. Banks are looking at asset rating their stock from a climate risk point of view. So stakeholders interfacing with BR data extend well beyond those of favorability energy calculations. And then the importance of having robust data is even more, is critical. Bad data means bad everything. But we know there's a massive energy performance gap with BR data. It's old data, 2020, but it hasn't been republished since, which shows the BR rating, or the energy consumption kilowatt hours per meter squared of A, B, C, D and E office buildings. And you can see that there's E-rated buildings that are using less energy than B-rated buildings. So the BR, or the EPC, whilst a comparative tool, is not a good indicator of actual energy performance. The other issue with data quality is that the EPC, or the BERs, are assessed by humans, and errors and outliers data are inevitable in manually collected data. And when we looked at the BER data, we find that this is for the residential side, that 30% of the database is bad data. And 24% of that relates to geometrical errors, one of the biggest errors being putting in building height at 22 metres, say, rather than 2.2 metres. There's other outliers in U values. They might have a U value of 0 and a U value of 7, which are just not representative. And if you remove all that outlier data, you actually remove 30% of the database. Now, what left is still remains very statistically significant in terms of sample size, but it's more robust. The other thing that we suffer from is this default effect in our databases. Defaults are there if an assessor comes in and you don't want them to core through your wall to figure out the exact composition of your wall. They'll assume a default characteristic, and that default characteristic is determined by the age of the property. And you can see there in the diagram that if you look at the bimodal characteristic of the stock, the default doesn't actually have a representation within that frequency distribution. It's wildly misrepresented. And that leads on the right to the orange, which is the default effect. So what that shows is dwellings characterized on a BER terms on the defaults and on more realistic values. And it often leads to a 2-band variance in the BER rating. And 1 in 3 of every entries into a residential database is quantified on defaults. So at the Observatory, we're trying to kind of make building stock energy modelling more robust. So we've characterised the stock in terms of predominant characteristics, looking at when the concrete clapper machine came into Ireland, and we moved from you know, our solid wall to brick, etc. And what we've done is characterize predominant wall U values by construction period. And we're refining and replacing default U values with more realistic U values so that we reduce that energy performance gap. Now, we are replacing one deterministic value with another deterministic value, but it is a better value. We're also developed a data validation approach. So again, it's human entry and manual. There's 17 entries into the BR database, which are manual. So we've looked at each one of those 17 entries, its frequency characteristic, and what would be the most appropriate outlier detection method to cut off the tails of that erroneous data. What's good about this method that we developed is it evolves as the database evolves. So as the frequency distribution changes, as retrofits happen, so will the outlier detection method. So we publish this data in a visually comprehensive or a comprehensible way. The thing about the SCI database is it gets overwritten every night. So there's no historical timestamp on the stock. You can see that most of our stock there is C-rated dwellings. But we do it by every quarter. We can look at whether it's urban or rural. Urban meaning it's likely gas-fired, and rural it's oil-fired. We can look at the dwelling type, because apartments have very different characteristics, say from detached properties. We're also looking at heat generation, what's the proportion of heat pumps into our stock. And then in this effort of democratizing access to data, we've made all our methodologies open, both in academic papers, but in scripts on GitHub. The other thing we're doing is plotting the data spatially. We have BR data for every small area and census code at the moment. And what we're doing is we're overlaying data on that in terms of social deprivation index to see is there a correlation between a socially disadvantaged area and high BRs or vice versa. And we're doing that with all data and energy infrastructure as well. So that gives us the ability to look historically at the characteristics of the stock and the evolution and the rate of change. And our climate action plan wants 1 in 4 dwellings retrofitted to a B2 or higher, and 1 in 5 dwellings to have heat pumps retrofitted. And by having historical data, we can forecast what the market trends look like. And we've brought that out to 2030 to see, are we going to meet our retrofit targets? With the B2 retrofits, yes, we're maybe 2 years out from meeting that target, but we're by 2032 rather than 2030. But for heat pumps, we're showing we're about 12 years off achieving the climate action plan. And that's because we've looked at a few C-rated dwellings. You can put PV on the roof of a house, which gives you the B2 energy retrofit, but it doesn't actually decarbonize the dwelling in terms of heat. To enable a heat pump installation. The other thing we're doing is we're characterizing reference dwellings, so segmenting the dwelling stock so that we can aggregate up to stock level, and we can micro-model reference dwellings which are representative of proportions of the stock. So what we use here is machine learning, AI, K-means clustering, because it's objective. It comes at the stock without any user bias or human bias. And, you know, you can see that pink circle there is 2010 dwellings, which have a reasonable U value, but with heat pumps, and the yellow would be the same dwelling in terms of U values, but with a gas boiler. And so we've used that data then, what that does is it's a 2D database, but we've turned them into 3D geometries. And the top 20 of those dwellings represent 85% of the stock. And so what we've done is validated those with real life example dwellings. And, you know, this, everyone will recognize this from the Irish countryside, but this is representative of 1 in every 10 dwellings in Ireland. One thing that the machine learning brought back to us, which didn't exist in any reference dwelling model before, was this idea of over shop apartments. Now, 4 in every 100 dwellings, they're less representative, but they're still in stock terms representative. So we can analyze specific measures for those dwellings, and that's representative of 1 in every 10, and this is representative of 4 in every 100. But the automation and the digitization of the data means we can repeat this exercise and, you know, track the evolution rates and construction evolution rates of the stock. Again, we're plotting by GIS insights, and we're putting electrical infrastructure on these, you know, the idea of, like, if we have excess renewable energy, what areas should benefit maybe from redeployment of that excess renewable energy. We've looked at the commercial, having kind of characterized the residential sector, we're then looking at the non-residential data landscape, and we found really that there's 2 main sources from building stock energy modelling perspective. We have the EPC data set, or the BR data set from SEI, and the population data set is the geodirectory, which is a geospatial directory as well. We have air codes in that. One issue that we have is, and this idea of unique identifiers, is that the geodirectory uses NACE classifications, which classifies buildings according to their economic activity as distinct from their use. So you might have professional professional, scientific and technical, and we'd infer that as perhaps being in an office. We really need to, if we're going to meet our obligations under Article 2022, have similar classification schemes within our databases so that we can merge them. Ideally, we'd have an air code, and we'd have the NEEP classification, and more ideally, again, the MPRN and GPRN of the properties, so we could actually get their energy consumption. And this is my final slide then. It's just what data-driven enhanced building stock modelling, what's the impact? And this is a slide from European agency Ahern, but you know, the impacts are across policy, renovation action, and there's very much to support real estate agents and those sort of stakeholders. There's an example at end, there's an association of 14 banks in Portugal, and their EPC database is public as per Article 22, and a banking association have accessed that database 1.9 million times in the last 6 months to understand, I suppose, the climate risk of their stock. And I suppose as all mortgage holders or house owners, that'll affect us all ultimately. So that's it. There's more information there if you like. Sorry, just want to give enough time to Stephen.
Thanks very much, Ciara. That's great. You know, the IBSO database is a huge resource, and it's fantastic, you know, to now have access to that more accurate data on energy consumption of Irish buildings. And I suppose it's also really good to see that it's so well aligned with the European level and the European legislation, because that's what we need, you know, for reporting and aligning all the policies as well. So thanks a million for that.